Hi, I'm Jay Leeming, and this is the Crane Bag Podcast, episode number 11. Ooh, ooh. Today we're going to spend some time listening to dragons in the earth. There once was a king who wanted to build a tower. So he called his workmen to him, and he described to them his desire. And they heard his orders, and they went off to build this tower. Now these were skilled craftsmen. They had handled stone for a long time. So they spent the day building this tower. They made a good start on this tower. And then evening came, and they retired to the castle with a feeling of a job well begun. Darkness came and covered the earth. People dreamed, they slept, the stars sang in the wild night sky. And then dawn came, a rooster crowed, and light came back to the earth. And the workers returned to the worksite, only to find all their labor from the day before ruined, botched, wrecked, all the stones cast aside, strewn across the grass, sparkling with dew. Their chalk lines, all their tools scattered this way and that way. It looked like a small tornado had been there, or some strange, mad, wild animal. What vandalism is this? They said to themselves. But they were professionals, so they set to work once more. And they spent the day building this tower. And once again, they made a good start on this tower, lifting stone upon stone, making a greater harmony out of those pieces of old earth. And when the day was done, once again they retired to the castle as the sun went down and darkness covered the face of the world. Then dawn came, a rooster crowed, light came again to the earth. And they returned to that place only to find once again all their work ruined, the stones scattered in the grass. So in dismay, they returned to the castle and went to the throne room to speak with the king. And they told them how some unseen force was working against all their labors. And the king listened to this, and then he consulted his wise men. He gathered them into the throne room, and he began to speak. He said, "Wise men, here is a puzzle for you to solve. Here is a conundrum for you to unlock. I wish to build a tower, yet every night somehow the work of my workmen is destroyed, scattered, all of it is undone. Tell me, what is working against me? What unseen force wants to destroy this tower? Tell me what I must do to build this tower." So the wise men went off and had a secret meeting. Perhaps they consulted with the stars. Perhaps they looked in their magic books. Perhaps they consulted the entrails of animals. Who knows what they did? Perhaps they did none of this. We do not know much about these wise men. But we do know that they returned to the throne room after some time. And they said to the king, "Your Majesty, we have the solution. We have the answer to this problem. What you must do is go to the village. Find a boy there who has no father. Bring him to the place where you wish to build a tower. Kill this boy and pour his blood into the earth. Once that is done, you will be able to build any tower that you please." "Thank you," said the king. So he called to his men, and he gave them orders. He told them to go into the village and find a boy with no father. And if they failed at this task, they need not return at all. So the king's men went to the nearby village. They looked, they listened, they searched that place. But every child that they found, every boy that they found, seemed to have a father. They looked long and hard. It seemed an impossible task. And then, late in the day, just as they were beginning to think they would need to leave that kingdom and find employment somewhere else in some distant place, they came to an orchard. And in this orchard, there was a boy being teased by several other boys. They were yelling and they were jeering at him. And they overheard one of them say, "You don't even have a father." And the smaller boy turned on them, and with a ferocious look in his eyes, he spoke wild words that seemed brewed up in the center of a mountain somewhere far away. Words of doublespeak and nonsense, furious, sacred nonsense that flummoxed and confused everyone there. The boys that were teasing him were scared. They backed away from the little boy, as you might from a dangerous and wild animal. So the king's men approached this boy, and they said simply, "The king has work for you to do." And they swept him up onto the back of one of their horses, and off they went, back to the castle. So they took him to the throne room, and they brought the boy before the king. And they said, "Sire, we have found a boy with no father. Here he is. Our job is done." And the king looked at the boy, and the boy looked at the king. And then, in an astounding display of chutzpah and arrogance, the boy spoke first and said, "What is this all about, king?" The king could only laugh. And he said, "Since you ask, I will tell you. I wish to build a tower, but some unseen force is working against my desire. It destroys, it undoes all the work of my workmen. My wise men tell me that if I find a boy with no father, kill him and pour his blood into the earth, then I shall be able to build this tower. You are that boy. Whatever you say or do, you are that boy. You have been chosen. So I am going to kill you and pour your blood into the ground so that I may build a tower." That is the story. And at this point, the boy simply laughed. A great, snow-colored, amazing laugh that claimed and nourished every corner of that castle in which it could be heard. And the king looked at him curiously and said, "What is your name, boy?" And the boy said, "My name is Merlyn, and your wise men are lying to you, and I can prove it." "Oh," said the king. "Yes," said Merlyn. "What you must do is go to the place where you wish to build a tower. Have your men dig a deep hole there. They will find water in the bottom of that hole. And then out of the water will come, frothing and fighting, 2 dragons, a red dragon and a white dragon. They will ascend into the air, they will fly away. And then you will be able to build your tower." Well, the king considered this, and then he said, "All right then, show me." And they went outside to the place where the tower was to be built. And the king brought all his workmen as well, and he told them to dig. And so they began to dig. They dug as the sun was going down, and as the moon was rising in the sky, a full moon. Picture them, the men throwing the dirt over their shoulders, the king watching, the boy Merlyn watching. Many of the king's wise men standing off to the side, watching as well. Deeper and deeper the shovels bit into the ground as the sun went down and the moon rose. And finally, they came to water. They came to a pool that seemed to be deep water down there under the earth. So So everyone looked into that pool. It was black and green. It was crammed with old shadows. They looked and they saw nothing but stillness, like a midnight brewed out of 1,000 years of sleep. Nothing was stirring in that pool, nothing at all. The king began to get impatient. One of the wise men came over to him and muttered to him, "This boy's lying. He's just trying to save his skin. There's water here, of course. There's water all over this island. There are no dragons here. I say kill him now, and you'll have your tower by dawn." The king looked once more into those waters. Nothing stirred in those waters. And then he breathed in, for he was about to give the order to cut Merlyn's throat and to pour his blood into the ground. But as he did so, someone on the other side of the pool suddenly shouted, "Look!" and pointed into the water. And they all looked, and they saw something. It looked like the fin of a red fish. It flickered, and then it went back into the shadows. They peered again into the water. And then suddenly the water erupted with a great splash of foam and water on all sides. Everyone jumped back, and 2 snarling dragons heaved themselves out of that water, grappling and tearing and shrieking the air into 1,000 pieces. Up and up they ride, up into the sky, higher and higher, grappling, biting, chewing at each other, their tails lashing, and everyone ducked as a great taloned wing went flying over their heads, and then higher they went up into the sky, rising, calling out, shrieking and roaring, higher and higher into the clouds, and they were gone. And the king looked at Merlyn and said, "What does this mean, boy?" And Merlyn said, "Do you know what you're asking, king?" And the king's hand snapped out, and he smacked Merlyn across the face, so he fell into the mud with blood falling from his lip. And he said, "Don't give me riddles, you little bastard. Tell me what this means." And Merlyn stood up. The boy Merlyn stood up. And his eyes rolled back in his head, and he began to sway, as though he were someone caught in a wind that no one else could feel. And he spoke and said, "O my king, the white dragon is you, the red dragon is your enemies. The white dragon will be killed in 3 days. I see its bones on a far-off mountain. I see the snow folded over those bones. In 1,000 years I see those bones turn to ash, ashes drifting on the wind, past a window where a woman sits looking out at the dawn. I see a ship sailing on the water. I see a sword coming out of the sea. I see a castle. Every window has a woman's face inside it. I see another castle. Inside it is a sick man surrounded by all the plants of the earth. I see a broken sword. I see dead horses in the ditches. I see a glad round room, and in that room there is a round table, and the men at that table and the women at that table are laughing and singing. Their voices and their lives are a great harmony that will teach many for years to come. I see bears in the wilderness. I see a broken goblet. I see green shadows forming out of the candlelight. I see Hutwe Argada Anya Dagadam 3 of Kenningathung Befrunan, Uthaithalingasilin Fremadon off shield, Shathing Shathan Atriatum, Monagum Matham, Menoset Lothea, Egosod Erla, Sithan Eraswarth, Feashaft, Fundan. And then he fell to the ground, and his eyes became normal once again, and he blinked like someone who was awoken from a dream. And the king spoke to his workmen and said, "Build me a tower." And so, in the moonlight, they set to work, and the king and the wise men and Merlyn went back to the throne room. The workmen worked all night, and all the next day. And before long, that tower was finished. And it stood tall and strong for a while. Because within a year, there was a great battle. And that castle was overthrown, and that king was overthrown. Fire crawled up the walls of that castle, devouring the tapestries and the chairs and the long tables. Some say that king died in that fire. Some say he slipped away ahead of time. He became a beggar. Some say he was the beggar at the door of the cathedral when Gawain walked through that cathedral doorway to marry the beast woman from the forest. Some say he sailed away in a small wooden boat and devoted his life to prayer and to solitude. In any case, nothing much more was heard of that king ever again. And Merlyn, well, he disappeared. He himself went off into the wilderness to live with shadows and with ashes, to read from the great book of silence that is 1,000 years old and as fresh as rain falling down out of the sky. There he learned the languages of this world, past, present, and future. There he spoke with the animals and listened to the dreams of himself, his bones, and the stones and the trees. There he learned many things. And one day, years later, Merlyn, in that forest, was going to a spring in the morning to draw water to drink. And a bird came and landed on his shoulder and began to speak. And the bird said, "Merlyn, in the city of London, there is a sword that has appeared inside a stone." And Merlyn said, "Yes, I know, for I have seen this in a dream." Hello, hello. Well, thank you for listening to this story. Thank you for being a part of it, for you are a part of it wherever you are, however you're hearing this, in whatever situation, you are a part of the telling of this story. And we are we're gathered in this place by this story. So please listen to whatever grabs you in this story. Listen to whatever door in this house of story rattles, and go through that door and see what you find. But being the one who's here with the microphone, I'll tell you what grabs me about this story. And for me, it's the dragons, of course, the red and white dragons. I found the story years ago and somehow remembered it, and then recently sought it out again. And I love that image of the red and the white dragon under the earth, snarling and fighting there, and then rising up into the sky. It's very simple. It's very beautiful. It's like an image out of Chinese medicine or Kundalini yoga. These two dragons, this energy in the earth that rises up into the sky. In Kundalini yoga, of course, you bring your energy from your bottom chakras up to your higher chakras. The chakras being those energy centers, those wheels, those books of information in our bodies. So you begin at the bottom. There's 7 of them. You begin with the survival chakra, moving on to the sex and the love chakra, and then self-identity, and then the heart, and then the voice, and then your insight, intuition, and then finally your connection to the divine, to what is eternal in the cosmos and in you. and in yourself. So the project in Kundalini Yoga is to bring your energy consciously and with great labor over years up through those chakras, rising up in that way. So this image reminds me of that and of that labor. It seems something very basic in the world, that image. Call it Celtic yoga, if you will. So next time you're in line at the bank or the airport or whatever, just holding that simple image in yourself might be a very cool thing to do and might bring you benefits you don't foresee. And of course, the dragons are fighting, which is interesting, which makes them very vital and alive, filled with energy. But it also gives me, anyway, the sense that things aren't quite right. Are they supposed to be under the ground? Well, they got wings, so probably not. So something has gone wrong here and needs to be fixed, needs to be changed. Or another way to put it, something is at a hard place in its journey and is not quite done with its journey. And these dragons need to keep moving and going on to the air, which is their natural element. So we can see this image in the body. We can feel it there. We can also put it in the earth. We can feel it in the earth. For the earth, of course, is like a great body, and the earth has spirits in it which can get snarled and may need to be freed and let out into the upper air. So in that sense, the king is out of alignment with the earth. We all live in relationship to the earth, of course, whether we know it or not. That's where we come from. That's where we go. And that relationship can be intentional and filled with grace and style and humility, or it can be blind and empty, and we're more like we're asleep or drunk. And perhaps the king is like that. He wants to build a tower, but something is going amiss. And actually, my heart goes out to the poor guy at a certain point when he just says, something is working against me, some unseen power. Perhaps you've felt that in your life. I know I have. Everything looks good on paper. Everything is set, ready to go, and then your plans don't come through. Something happens. Call it the weather, call it an accident. Something unseen works against you. So by unseen, we could say unconscious, right? We try to remain conscious of everything. We try to plan everything we need to plan for the camping trip, for the job, for the relationship, for our futures. But unseen forces, be they within us or without us, outside of us, they come into play. So for a moment there, this is a story of a cruel tyrant, basically. It's more the tone he has in this story than anything much that he does, but he's not the nicest guy. And but he's plagued by these unseen forces. So for a moment, I feel that compassion for the guy. And he wants to build a tower, and it's not working out. Something undoes. Something scrambles all his work, and it cannot be built. So in a way, he's imposing, well, not in a way, he is imposing his will on the land, and the land is saying, actually, no. He is saying tower, and the land is saying no tower. And so he is not aligned with that. There's some energy in the earth which is against that. The old belief is that the king must marry the land. The king has a queen, of course, a human counterpart, but he also marries the land and the goddess of the land and must be in good relationship with her and with the land. And in this story, clearly that is not happening. The king is not in harmony with the land, and so things go wrong. This may seem familiar to you. It's the world we live in. Many cultures of this world that are more deeply rooted than our own have methods and ways for relating to the earth and the spirits in it. And I say earth in a big way, but of course we mean rocks, sparrows, mud, that hill over there. We mean the local, actual earth, the place where you live. And many cultures have a way of relating to that. We have lost those ways for the most part, and they've been lost for a while, especially in practice, maybe also just in our memory as well, culturally. And of course, in many places in the world, this knowledge still persists and continues. In China, Feng Shui persists as a method for aligning the human will with the landscape there and deciding how the building should be situated. And if the land doesn't want it there, how do you eloquently and with humility court that land, coax it, speak to it in a way in which your desire and the desires of the land can be in harmony? I live in a place where there was a swamp hundreds of years ago, and a swamp for a long time. And there's a river here which would run wild and move around about, as rivers like to do. Then a while back, it was put into a concrete channel by the Army Corps of Engineers. And for that reason, there's houses here because the land is now stable and is dry for the most part. But the river is in that channel and it wants to do other things. So it complains, it pulls in silt and mud and stuff like that. And the city has to dredge it every now and again. So that's just one example from my life of the way we control the land and the earth, or presume to control it, when in fact it is beyond our control. So in this story, we have a situation like that. The king wants a tower, but the earth does not. And then we get this boy, Merlyn. And, of course, I love that. And he is wise. He's wiser than all the adults in the room. And I like that a lot. And why is that? Well, he's wise because he's Merlyn, we could say. And Merlyn has sort of a supernatural birth. This story doesn't spell it out. There's lots of legends about him. In some, the devil was actually his father. But that's kind of a real Christian judgment call on that. But we could just say that he's got some source beyond his earthly mother and father. As in some way we all do, we could say. But in any case, he's got special knowledge, and so he can figure out how to solve this situation. But he's also a child, and I like that about this story, that it's a child Merlyn we're encountering here. Children seem to be closer to the earth. I have a daughter, and my observation, especially when she was quite young, children notice things the adults don't. The adults are busy paying the mortgage, are busy making things stand, paying for that house, putting supper on the table. The children are freer to play and to dream their way into the landscape. I'm sure you've seen that, right? It's just amazing. I mean, kids, and we poo-poo it as a kid's game, but they see stuff. They find trees that talk, and they imagine things into the earth all the time. Our imagination goes somewhere else. These days, it goes out into space. It goes into the future. It goes into our own plans, perhaps. But the direction of our imagination is more out there and in the realm of science and less in the realm of what is going on inside that tree, what is going inside of that stone. That wasn't always the case. And of course, science and natural history, those studies are rooted in imagination and in dreaming a story into the land, of course. So in any case, Merlyn's a boy, a kid, and he has this sense that the adults don't. He's able to be aware. And I've seen little kids, of course, they find stuff. Oh, I found a robin's egg here in the corner. I found a stick that's really cool. They are hip to what's going on. They're wise about what's happening in the earth, actually. So I love that part of the story as well, that it is a child, Merlyn, who is wiser than the grown-ups. So perhaps by listening to this story, we can be aware of the dragons in the earth and listening for them. And when there's snarls around us, when things don't go well in our own lives or in the world, perhaps we can see how the earth is involved and what it might want. And listening to the wind and the birds and the trees and the rocks and the rivers, and remembering that we are a part of that and we are in dialogue with that. And who knows what might come from that practice, from that openness and that listening that we could do. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Comments and stuff like that are welcome. My website, jayleeming.com, JAYLEEMING.com. Thanks, of course, to the Patreon supporters. Yay! Without you, this would not happen. And may we see the story in which we are involved. Thanks very much for listening to this podcast. Take care.